All right.
It's got an attitude.
Ready? Teenager. So, today we're going to start 16b at the end. We said, we're learning in the Mishnah. We said Hakol Sheichtim, that everything should be shechted. That's our translation for the beginning of this. Everything should be shechted. We said that's referring to a bird, which wasn't mefurish in the Torah that you need to shech the bird. It says chalta basar. We said that no, even a bird. Then we said liyolam shechtim, that you always have to shech. Everything needs to be shechted at all times. I said who's the opinion that would make this significant? That you need to always shech. Why would I think differently? So Rabbi says it's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. Now, really, if I get a chumash here, pull this off, just 1 second. So there's two psukim in Parshas Re'eh. Two psukim in Parshas Re'eh that make a big difference between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. One pasuk, it's one after another. It's Perikei Bais, pasuk Chaf. It says, "Ki yarchav Hashem es gvolcha kasher diber lach." Hashem will broaden your borders, and you will say, "Let us eat meat," because our soul desires meat. In all the desires you shall eat. You can. In all the desires of your soul, you could eat meat. If you are distant from the place that Hashem chose to put His name there, and you will slaughter from your cattle and from your sheep that Hashem has given to you, as I've commanded, and you will eat in your gates with all the desires of your soul. Okay, so there's two verses here. Rabbi Shmuel says that with this first pasuk, when you will broaden your borders and you will eat meat, Rabbi Shmuel says it's coming to tell us that in the desert you weren't allowed to eat meat. When you'll broaden your borders and you'll say you desire to eat meat, only when you come to Eretz Yisrael you're allowed to eat meat. We're going to see Rabbi Akiva's opinion shortly. However, when they came into the land, they were allowed to eat meat. When they leave the land of Israel, when they're exiled, so maybe it goes back to its original rule where you can't eat meat. So the Mishnah says, "Li'olam sheich." No, even after they leave Israel, they still can eat meat. So yesterday we concluded with Rabbi Yosef has a question. Li'olam sheichten? No, li'olam sheichten va'oichlin. Not that they always have to shech. They always are allowed to eat. The emphasis is wrong. It's not li'olam sheichten. It's li'olam oichlin. That's and also va'oid. Another question. This is where we're holding. It's 3 lines from the bottom. Me'ikara my time itzar. Why were we not allowed to eat meat in the desert? We were eating man. Or if there was a shlamim, you could have brought a sacrifice. Bless you. And eaten the meat of a sacrifice. But what's the reason? Davi makarvi lemishkan, because they were close to the Mishkan. So if you're going to eat meat, bring it as a sacrifice, and you have no excuse. L'besoif my time ishtaru. And why was it permitted later, when they moved to Israel? Davi marachkim in Mishkan, because they were far from the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash. So the Kolshkin Hashta, Rabbi Yosef asks, if when you're far from the Mishkan you're allowed to eat meat,
Kolshkin and Galus.
and Galus, Darchikol Etzvei, we're even further. For sure we should be allowed to eat meat. Why do I need the Mishnah to tell me, La'olam sheichtim, as if I could have thought that maybe in Galus we're not allowed to eat meat, because we're now even further from the Mishkan. As you move more and more, the more you distance yourself further away from that central temple or tabernacle, so then it becomes more permissible.
What's the basis for not eating meat near the Mishkan?
Oh, because the logic would be that near the Mishkan, any meat that is eaten should be brought as a sacrifice.
Okay, so what? It's not logic.
Yeah, it's
I mean, we don't make halacha based on logic, as
no,
I'm saying.
it's a rule that we're not used to.
Okay.
Because we never came across this. Every animal that has to be a sacrifice.
Right.
But in the desert, that's how it was. If you wanted to eat meat, you had to bring it as a sacrifice. And then, in other words, part of it would go to the altar, part of it would go to the koyanim, and you would eat the rest.
Did they have to shecht it slav, or whatever that was called?
Yeah.
So isn't that the proof that you had to shecht and
Yeah, that
you
was
could eat in
the complaint. They wanted meat.
No, but isn't
how many died when they ate it?
why wouldn't that be a proof here that?
No, here we're discussing that when we came to the land of Israel, then we were allowed to eat any meat and not bring it as a sacrifice.
But he's
But
saying
now,
that the Slav was eaten in the midbar without a sacrifice.
right?
That's a good point.
So maybe.
Good
You can't bring
coffee
the
this
slav on
morning.
the mizbeach. That's not an animal.
Yeah, maybe.
What?
That's the answer. That's
What?
the answer.
That was my
The
question.
what?
The slav wasn't an animal that could be brought as a sacrifice. But we're going to see. We have to wait till we get that answer. The Gemara is going to say something similar to that.
Was it?
Did they have to take challah from the man? Now I'm really going to drive you nuts.
Sounds like Rabbi Yomi.
If the first thought of the man was about meat, and the second thought was about coffee with milk, is that acceptable? Okay.
We busted the challah, and that's it.
They said they
But if you were
Throw it
tzaddik
away.
and you thought about meat,
They-
shame it's meat.
They said they overheard a mother saying in the desert, "Don't let me catch you thinking about your ice cream before you think about your string beans." Okay. El Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is the one that asked Rabbi these questions. You're saying that our Mishnah that says Li'olam Sheichten is referring to after we're exiled, because maybe we're going to go back to the original law where you're not allowed to eat meat, and Kamashma comes to teach us that no, you are allowed to eat meat. Rabbi Yosef has a better, he has these two questions on it. He has his own interpretation. Rabbi Yosef says Rabbi Akiva. It's actually Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya was taught in the Braisa. Rabbi Akiva's, notice that it doesn't quote the first pasuk. It doesn't quote the pasuk of Ki Yarcheh Hashem. He quotes the second pasuk. Ki Yerchach Mimcha Makam Ashivcha Hashem Alekecha Lasam Shmei Sham Vezavacht Mim Bekarcha Mitzayincha. Quotes the second pasuk there. When you will be distanced from the temple, and you will want to eat meat, and you will slaughter from your cattle, and you can eat in your gates and eat. Rabbi Akiva Aimer, Rabbi Akiva says, Leiba Akasav Ela Lesel Basar Nechira. The Torah is telling you that now, if you want to eat meat, you need to slaughter it. You can't shoot it. Nechira means to pierce it. You can't arrow it or something. What's the English over there? How does that sound? Nechira. Piercing. By piercing. Shebetchila Hutelam Basar Nechira. In the desert, they were allowed to.
After Matan Torah?
Yeah, they were allowed to eat without shechita. We have a pasuk when they come into the land. Nasalem basar nechira. Once you come into the land, now you have to shecht. Ba'achshav shagalu. Okay, after once we're in exile, yachal yachzor le'ter rishon. Maybe you can go back to eating with piercing. So that's why it says. No, you have to shecht. So it's very interesting. There are two sides over here. According to Rabbi Shmuel, we could have thought that maybe you're not allowed to eat meat at all, and so it says no leilam shechting. You know you're allowed to eat meat. According to Rabbi Akiva, we could have thought maybe you're allowed to eat meat without shechita. Kamash malan, we need to that you need to shecht it. My kamiflagi. What is the machlekes we're going to go through here? The machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. What's the basis? Let me just add. Let's go through it first, and I'll add in some interesting points here. Rabbi Akiva Savar. Rabbi Akiva holds basar taiva le'itzaklal. You were always allowed to eat meat. There was never a prohibition on eating meat that wasn't a sacrifice. That's called basar taiva. Just you wanted to eat meat. It was never forbidden. Rabbi Shmuel Savar basar nechira le'yishtri klal. Rabbi Shmuel holds that they were never allowed to eat meat that was pierced. So now we have, what are these psukim doing? We have these two psukim here that say now you're allowed to eat meat with slaughtering. So for Rabbi Akiva, there was never a prohibition. So what's it saying? Now you're allowed to eat meat with slaughtering. It's coming to tell me that you have to slaughter it. According to Rabbi Shmuel, there was never a permissibility to eat without slaughtering. So what's it telling me? That you're allowed to eat it. Okay. That doesn't need to be a sacrifice. Bishleim Rabbi Shmuel, it works out well according to Rabbi Shmuel. Hainu diksiv v'shachar espen abakar. It says that you'll shech the sacrifice, the korban. Rabbi Akiva, my b'shachat. Why does it say b'shachat? You pierced the ben abakar. So the Gemara answers kachim shiny. Rabbi Akiva wasn't saying that you were allowed to offer a sacrifice with piercing. He was saying that if you wanted to eat regular meat, then you can pierce. But a sacrifice needed to be slaughtered. Bishleim the Rabbi Shmuel works out well according to Rabbi Shmuel. Hainu diksiv atzaynu bakar yishachet lan. This is, I think, when by the Slav, before the Slav, Moshe says, I'm going to slaughter meat for them, and it's cattle, and it says yishachet. You should say yinacher or something, right? He'll pierce it. Why does it say, according to Rabbi Akiva, they didn't need to shech? So why does it say yishachet? So it works out well according to Rabbi Shmuel. He says they always had to shech. El Rabbi Akiva, mayatzayna baka yishachet lahem, yinacher lahem mibayle. It should have said that he'll pierce it for them. Nechira shalahem zui shchitas. And the Gemara answers that's what it means. It means yishachet, that the slaughtering here, it says slaughtering, but it actually means that, well, piercing. And that's the term. Bishleim of the Rabbi Shmuel, it works out well according to Rabbi Shmuel, is our third question. If someone shechs, but it wasn't valid, the shechita wasn't valid. V'haneicher, someone that pierces. V'ma'aker, he pulls out the pipes, trachea. So pater melachasis. He doesn't need to cover the blood. Here we're talking about either a bird or a wild animal. And the rule is that the blood needs to be covered after the shechita. The blood that drips on the floor, you have to cover it. You take dirt, and it's a mitzvah, kisei adam, to cover the blood. Now, you only have to cover the blood if it was a valid shechita. Now, the Gemara is asking here that according to Rabbi Shmuel, if someone was noicher, he doesn't need to cover the blood. Why? He pierces it because it wasn't valid. But according to Rabbi Akiva, although right now it's not valid, but there was a time when it was valid, and the Gemara is thinking that because there was a time that this was permissible, even though right now we don't need it, but you should still be, it's still valid, you should still be able to, you should still have an obligation to cover the blood. So El Rabbi Akiva, my pater melachasis. The Gemara answers, Hayel v'itzar itzar. 1 second, it's forbidden. We're not saying that it's our minhag not to eat it. It's forbidden, and it wasn't considered valid. Now it's really not valid. So therefore, you don't have to cover the blood. Now we go the other way. Bishleim Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, it works out well. Damar basar taiva liyitzar klal, that says it was never prohibited to eat meat. You could always eat meat. Hainu diksiv ach kasher yochel es hatzvi v'esa ayil kein techlenu. It says, it goes, the third pasuk says, the way you eat a deer and an ayil, so you shall eat, which means pure and impure together. You could eat it. Now, you are allowed to eat that. What is that example? According to Rabbi Akiva, you're allowed to eat meat. So that's a good example. It's telling you when you come into the land when you come into the land, you need to shecht it. And how do you shecht it? The same way that you do with tzvi and an ayil. That's how you're going to do it with the other animals. El Rabbi Shmuel, tzvi v'ayil gufei mi'avishari. What is this example that you're going to eat meat the way you eat the deer and an ayil? What is that example? It's everything. Everything is forbidden to eat in the desert. Now you're coming into the land of Israel. We're saying it's permissible. permissible like a deer, but you weren't allowed to eat deer. Gemara explains. What did the Torah make forbidden? Animals that were eligible to be brought as a sacrifice. You needed to bring it as a sacrifice. Aval chaya, but a wild animal like a deer, that you were allowed to eat in the desert. That's your answer with the slav. So the quail wasn't a sacrifice, so that wouldn't have been a question. But
So even according to Rabbi Shmuel, they were allowed to eat
you're allowed
meat.
to eat other types of meat, other animals that wouldn't have been brought. Buffalo.
With shchita.
With shchita, yeah, because Rabbi Shmuel
He
holds
doesn't
everything.
hold
Yeah,
them
yeah.
Because otherwise, I mean, all the obviously,
Right. Right. What would the prohibition be? Only when we had a tabernacle, it needed to be brought as a korban. Okay. Rashi said before that when they were in the desert, they weren't allowed to eat meat unless it was a sacrifice. He quotes the pasuk in Vayikra, which is talking about that if you don't bring the sacrifice to the temple, Vayikra Yud Zayin, it says any man that slaughters an ox or a goat or a sheep or a goat in the camp, or he slaughters it out of the camp and he doesn't bring it to the temple, so this is considered his blood. It gets kares. Rashi says that according to Rabbi Shmuel, this is talking about that you need to bring all your animals to the temple, to the tabernacle. Otherwise, it's kares. You weren't allowed to eat meat. Rashi here says, talking about real sacrifices. We're talking about sacrifice. We're not talking about chulin. Who would learn the pasuk like this? Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is going to look at this pasuk and he's going to say, "You're allowed to eat meat in the desert. So why does the pasuk say if you don't bring your animal to the temple, then to the tabernacle, then you get kares in Vayikra?" He says it's talking about a sacrifice. If you have a sacrifice and you sacrifice it outside the temple, so then there's kares, shchutei chutz. The sacrifice needs to be brought to the temple. Rabbi Shmuel would learn this pasuk that it's dealing with chulin. That's what Rashi says over here. That every animal needs to be brought to the temple. Now, when it comes to this pasuk, Yirchak Mimcha Makim, Rashi over here says, when your borders will expand, and you'll be allowed to eat meat, and whenever you all the desire of your soul. He says, but in the desert, they weren't allowed to eat meat. It's coming like Rabbi Shmuel. So Rashi and Chumash contradicts. At least you can't learn Rashi and Chumash the same way that Rashi and the Gemara is working, because Rashi and the Gemara is learning that pasuk that in Vayikra is a machlekes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel how to learn Vayikra. It's referring to sacrifices or referring to regular mundane animals. There's kares if you don't bring it to the temple. What's it referring to? Mundane animals or sacrifices? It's a machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva according to Rashi and on the Gemara. And over here we have a machlekes. What's it talking about? Okay, so now. What does Rabbi Akiva do with the pasuk that says that whenever you desire to eat meat, you're allowed to eat meat? What is he going to do with that pasuk? You're always allowed to eat meat. So Rashi says that he's going to say that pasuk is telling me derech eretz, that you should only eat meat l'teyavain. You shouldn't eat meat as a staple. Only if you have an appetite. He you want to have something extra, you have meat. But limda Torah derech eretz, not to eat meat as a staple. So it shouldn't be Atkins, diet. Okay, what does Rabbi Yishmael do with when you're distant from the place and then you're going to slaughter? Why does it say over here that you will slaughter? What do I need to tell? According to Rabbi Yishmael, there was never any time when I didn't have to slaughter. I always had to slaughter. So Rashi gives 3 answers to this. First answer is, that's just the normal way of the pasuk to talk about eating meat. It says zvicha, or else it's telling me that psuli hamakdashin, sacrifices that got a mum, the only thing you're allowed to do with them is v'zavachta v'achalta. You're only allowed to slaughter them and eat them, but you're not allowed to gizav avodah. You're not allowed to work them. That's a sacrifice that has a blemish. And the third thing that Rashi learns from here is that you're not allowed to take a mundane animal and bring it into the temple. Okay. So we worked it out, the 2 psukim according to Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and then back to Vayikra, which Rashi throws into. Okay. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah has a question. It's a classic. Ivari basar nechira she'echnisan la'aretz imam she'echnisi Yisrael imam la'aretz mahu. According to Rabbi Akiva, you were allowed to pierce meat and eat it in the desert. Let's say someone pierced meat in the desert, and he somehow preserved it, and he brings it. It's salami, and he brings it into the land of Israel. Now, what's the rule in the land of Israel? You have to slaughter it. So Yirmiyah has a question. Can I eat your old hechsher? It had a badat hechsher from before in the desert. Can you now eat it in the land of Israel? Because it's not that you pierced it now and you killed it now. It was killed before. It was kosher. Yes, it was in your pots, and all of that. What do you do now when you're in the land of Israel?
But doesn't have a cheskes kashrus?
Well, yeah, it was kosher before, but now the rules changed in the land of Israel. So this is a classic question from Rabbi Yirmiyah. He asks this type of questions. The Gemara asks, Amos, when is the question? When is the meat? Eily b'sheva shekavshu. If it's talking about the war years, they had conquering years, 7 years. Hashta davar tami yishter lahu. They were soldiers. They were in battle. They're allowed to eat whatever they found. You're asking about the salami that was before they could eat pig, the Gemara is going to say. The Ksiva Batamayim Kol Tovez, the Gemara learns that you come to the land and you'll find houses full of good things. Avam Rabbi Yirmiyah Barabba Ambarav, Rabbi Yirmiyah Barabba says in the name of Rav, Katli the Chaziri. They could eat katli, sounds like cutlets. That's probably what it is. Similar, I don't know pieces of
Schnitzel.
No, bacon. It says bacon.
Is that the word that he uses? Okay, it's pig meat you can have. It sounds like the word is cutlet. Kind of sounds like cutlet. You can eat.
Warriors can eat bacon for breakfast.
The warriors.
It says bacon.
So they could have a pig. Basar nechira miboy. You're asking, are they allowed to eat this salami that was kosher in the desert? They can eat whatever.
This was also only in those 7 years, not
No.
in every war.
So very interesting. The Rambam writes that there's a machlekes rishonim if it's everywhere. I forget. There's a machlekes rishonim if it applies. Maybe the Ramban says that it's only that war, but the Rambam writes that it's permissible to eat even meat, even pig's meat, but only if they don't have other food.
That sounds like because Nakosha.
Right, right. But from our Gemara, it doesn't.
If you have in your backpack a sandwich and you go see a
Right.
piece of meat, you can't eat it.
Right.
But in those
Right.
7 years, you could, because it was a special person.
No, I think the Rambam is
Even
referring to
those,
even
those
then.
years?
Even then, I think it was only if they,
No.
which is the chiddush, because from our Gemara, it looks like it's,
Could have
it is,
had
you know. So the Gemara answers Elam Yachar Mikan. We're talking about afterwards, after the 7 years. You follow this? He has a piece of meat that he preserved for 7 years. He wants to know if it's still permissible afterwards.
Did they come
And-
out of the base medrash?
No, not this.
I'm going to point out the interesting Rashi in a moment. And some say La'ilam b'sheva shekavshu. Really, it's talking about the 7 that they're conquering. But kiyishtru l'shal shalevet kechavim. That was only if it was the spoils. The spoils they were allowed to take. But didhu la'yishtri. But their own things that were not kosher, that wasn't allowed. The spoils, that was a special heter for this time. And the Gemara finishes Teiku. Teiku means we leave this as a question. Rashi says that it's a very not relevant question because we don't have any of the meat. And what are we talking about?
It's more a philosophical
So-
question. Once something is mutter, does it maintain its custom?
Excellent. So Rashi says, Drush v'kabel schar. He says, well, first of all, he says that we're going to learn and we're going to receive rewards for learning, even though it doesn't have a relevance. Okay. The Rosh asks on Rashi, he says that the concept of Drush v'kabel schar is a concept that's used, but that's only when we're darshaning a pasuk. That doesn't. Definitely here. He says it can't be that this is what we're referring to. He says we're talking about what you said. There's actually an afkamina. That if a person makes a vow on himself that he's not going to eat something after a certain time, if the time comes and he still has some that's left over from before, is he allowed to eat it? Then, so let's say he says, I'm not going to eat fish after Rosh Chodesh or something, and he has Rosh Chodesh comes and he still has some fish left. Is he allowed to finish that fish? So that's what he's. That's why this is relevant. So the Rabbi Kiva Eger asks on the Rosh. He says, over there, in the Gemara's in the Gemara's question, we're dealing with something that was actually kosher, and now you're in the land of Israel, and the laws changed. But this was kosher before. We want to know what was kosher before. Can you eat it now? When someone takes a vow, that vow was I'm starting at a certain point. Beforehand, I could eat it. Now I can't eat it. It's so different. I'm not saying that there was that this had a vow, but it was permissible, and now I'm extending it on. There was no vow before. There's only a vow afterwards. This was never permissible from that vow. The vow never started. So he asks on the Rosh, the comparison is such an odd comparison to be able to say that now we're going to, based on this question, we're going to say what the halach is with his fish. Okay. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Shanisa kol sheichtim. It may be Rabba, because we had a Rabba, we had a Rabbi Yosef. It's funny if we're going back to Rabba and changing this. Rabba would be a generation down. On the side of my Gemara it says Rabba. Shanisa kol sheichtim, u'la'olam sheichtim. You explained there were 3 phrases in the Mishnah. You always have to shecht. You always have to shecht. 2 different always. One was referring to birds, which we said everything needs to be shechted. You always have to shecht means even after the destruction. And bakol shechtem, my mashneslei. What is bakol? With everything you shecht. Maybe it's referring to that you can use any sort of knife. Rava doesn't approve of this. He says, it needs to be similar to the first. We have 3 phrases, one after another. they're not symmetrical. The first one, let's read it through. If the first ones are talking about who's allowed to shecht, hainami b'sheichtim. So this should also be that. This would also make sense that who's allowed to shech. V'hanach b'neshchatim. If those are talking about what gets shechted, so hainami b'neshchatim, then bakol sheichtim should also be with what gets shechted. It's sort of like the subject or the object. We're learning here that hakol sheichtim is referring to birds, the object. Li'olam sheichtim is the meat needs to always be shechted, even after we're exiled. Bakal shechtim is referring to the subject. What type of knife is used in the slaughtering? It's not going on what gets slaughtered. It's going on the slaughters knife. But the problem is that we're switching from, are we talking about the slaughterer or we're talking about what gets slaughtered? It's all three. Two of them we applied to what gets slaughtered, and then the third one we said it's going to be talking about the knife, which is the slaughterer. Elam Rava, rather Rava says differently. Here it says Rava. Hakol sheichtim. What is it referring to? Everything is shechted? No. Everyone can shecht. It's going back on the person, on the subject. Chad lasuya kuti, v'chad lasuya Yisrael. Yisrael mumah. Yisrael mumah. The problem is Hakol sheichtim. We already had a Mishnah Hakol sheichtim at the beginning of the parak, and over there we said, what are we coming to include? Maybe a kuti, maybe someone that doesn't know the halachas well, all of those things. Remember, we had a bunch of options there, and a Yisrael mumar. So Rabbi says that one Hakol sheichtim in the first Mishnah is referring to a kuti. Hakol sheichtim of this Mishnah is referring to Yisrael mumar. Mumar, even for nevela, we said that, but l'teyavan. If he shechts, maybe you're supposed to stand there or something. No, you're supposed to pass him a knife. So, but then that would still be a valid shechita. La'olam sheichtim, you could always shecht. It's not referring to even after we're exiled. It's referring to bein bayom, bein balayla, bein b'reisha gag, bein b'reisha sfina, whether it's by day or by night. We learned if there's a torch, remember, or if it's you're on a roof or on a boat, and then it makes sense. Bakol sheichtim that with anything you can shecht. That's bein b'tzur, bein b'schuchas, bein b'kum shalkana. That you can use a rock. You can use a glass, or you can use a stem of a reed. Okay, so we reinterpreted the Mishnah now differently than we did at the end of yesterday's year. Chutz mi magal katzer v'amagir. The exception is that you're not allowed to use a harvesting sickle and a saw. Avua de Shmuel pagam v'shadar.